Welcome and welcome back. This is your curious European friend, and in today's video, I want to react to this British guy who's comparing life in Australia and New Zealand because I think he's been living in both. Well, not at the same time, of course, as that's not humanly possible. But yeah, I'm always curious about New Zealand and Australia and their differences and maybe their similarities. Not that, of course, they're not the same country, but yeah, always curious what their differences are, and especially coming from a European, because then maybe I can relate more to that perspective. So let's go ahead and see what I think about this, or what he thinks and what I think about that. Let's go.
So, what is a better country to live in, Australia or New Zealand, from a British person's perspective? We're going to go into some of the differences in this video and some reasons why you should move to either. Now, first of all, for a bit of background, I am 24 years old from the UK. I left the UK at 21. I lived in Australia for 2 years, saw most of the country, and then I'm living currently in New Zealand. Been in New Zealand for about 5 or 6 months now, so I've got a fairly good idea now of what it's like to live in both countries. Now, both countries being fairly close to each other in the world, however, there is quite a lot of differences, and I definitely have a favourite, which I'll come on to. But before we get on to my favourite, you might be able to guess by my comparisons, but yeah. Now, this video is going to be aimed at people on working holiday visas a lot, but you can also take advice from this video if you're moving here on any other kind of visa or just traveling. And that's the first point, is traveling. I haven't actually traveled much of New Zealand yet. However, it is a very beautiful country. And
wait, you can go to New Zealand on a working holiday visa too? Because you guys did tell me that you can do that with Australia. I didn't know if you could do that with New Zealand.
Definitely a lot of travel opportunities here. In terms of travel, it's meant to be one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and there's so much to see, especially the South Island. Like, it's meant to be beautiful, so much amazing stuff, and it's nowhere near as big as Australia, so you can see a lot more in a lot smaller of an area. Australia, I travelled most of it, was amazing to travel. The only downside of travelling in Australia is how far apart everything is. It's a massive country, so travelling there, like, you get used to long journeys, but in New Zealand I'm sure you don't have to do that as much. But I thought I'd clear this up at the start because I haven't travelled all of New Zealand like I have in Australia. Now, which country is good for young backpackers? Well, it depends what you're looking for, to be honest. Both countries have their benefits in terms of living there and travelling for backpackers. One key difference that I've noticed is in Australia there is so many more other young backpackers that you can meet. I've hardly met any young travellers in New Zealand, particularly from the UK. There's hardly any here in Australia. Pretty much everywhere I went, you met other English backpackers, particularly in the cities. I'm in Auckland right now, and there is not many travellers or young English people at all. Compare that to like Sydney and Perth, for example. There's so many young English travellers in our share house, at work, whatever. Do you know what I mean? You do meet a lot more backpackers in Australia. So if you're looking for a country where you're going to meet lots of other backpackers and really get that backpacker traveller life, Australia is definitely a better option. Now let's speak about working in each country. So which country was easier to find a job? Kind of hard. I would say it's been fairly similar. Auckland, I would say, is on the harder side of finding a job compared to Australia, but it was still relatively easy. I found getting work in most of the cities in Australia fairly easy. In Auckland it was maybe a little bit harder, but I still managed to get a job fairly easily. In Australia I was set up with a job within a week in most places. Here was about a week or two, so not a massive amount of difference. I would say there's probably more jobs going in Australia, but because there's a lot more travellers and people there, the competition for jobs is a lot higher, which is definitely a benefit of New Zealand.
But yeah, so if I'm assuming then he does the work holiday thing and then gets jobs, of course, to work there and then also travel. But I wonder like how much time do you get to travel? Because otherwise you still would have to stay in the same kind of place. But yeah, I guess it also depends what kind of job you are and how flexible they are. But yeah, just wondering about the logistics there, because that does seem like a really nice option to explore the country more and just explore a different country in general if you're not from there. Yeah, to be able to work and then at the same time travel around the country to see more of it. Because, yeah, otherwise you could get a vacation, but I feel like that's less convenient and you might have less time to travel the whole country. But yeah, anyways.
Not as much competition when going for jobs and houses and stuff. Speaking of houses, finding a house in New Zealand was so much easier than Australia. We had this apartment lined up before we even got to New Zealand, which shocked us, to be honest, because there was no chance of that in Australia. Moving to new cities in Australia, it would take us at least a couple of weeks to get set up with a house. Yeah, it would take us a while. We'd have to go to so many viewings. Getting our own place was near enough impossible. To be fair, we are sharing a house now. Share houses are the way forward because finding your own place, particularly in Australia, is so hard. And I've also found that rent is a bit cheaper here. We're in the city and we're paying pretty much what you'd pay to live out of the city in Australia. I would say rent and finding a house is easier and cheaper in New Zealand than in Australia. When you're set up and working, which country has a better wage? You guys probably have an idea if you've watched a bit of content about...
Is that supposed to be Australia, right? I thought so from this video I reacted to recently about the different costs between Australia and New Zealand.
Australia and New Zealand, but Australia has a much higher wage than New Zealand. Now, which country is more expensive? Generally, I found them fairly similar. Rent is cheaper in New Zealand. Food, groceries, stuff like that is cheaper in Australia. They're very close in terms of how expensive they are. I would say New Zealand is very slightly more expensive. The biggest difference though is obviously the wage. When you take that into account, I would say Australia definitely has a much better cost of living compared to New Zealand. Living in Australia, we were putting away an extra $200 a week into our savings than living here in New Zealand, and that was with doing way more activities on the weekends in Australia. You really have to get your head down in order to work in New Zealand. So now let's compare the weather for both countries. It's kind of hard to compare it with Australia because it's a massive country and each kind of place has its own climate. I'll kind of base it on some of the main cities there, so Perth, Sydney, Melbourne, that sort of thing. Obviously if you go up to Queensland and Northern Territory, it's hot and humid. It's like Asia, Southeast Asia, it's proper humid and always hot. I've got to say, the weather in New Zealand is worse than anywhere I've been in Australia.
Oh, I thought he was going to say worse than anywhere I've been on the planet. I was like, wow. Okay, but fair enough. Worse than anywhere he's been in Australia. I kind of would have thought it would not be the case. Yeah, maybe I still don't really have a very good understanding of what the weather is actually like in New Zealand. But I thought you mostly have 4 seasons and it's relatively mild. So maybe that means you do have less of a full-on like summer, but also less hot and humid, right, than Australia. Which I think, if that is the case, I would prefer New Zealand's weather personally, because I don't know, I like having 4 seasons. I don't know, yeah. I guess in Australia, well, I guess you have more like 2 seasons, or it depends per place as well. Because I think was it Melbourne that you also kind of can have 4 seasons in one day or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I just really like having quite well, not, it doesn't have to be like really distinct, but having seasons and seeing the world around you change, I noticed I get a little bit uncomfortable when it doesn't. So anyway, let's go on with the
The weather here is not the one. It's midsummer right now, and the weather is now, for the first time, actually quite nice. But we had to wait right up until December to be able to go to the beach. In fact, we went home for Christmas, and it wasn't until we got home at the end of December that we were actually able to go to the beach in New Zealand. It took so long to warm up here, and I know the South Island apparently gets a lot more sun, but living in Auckland, I've never seen rain so much in my life, and this is coming from someone who lives in the UK.
Yeah, wait, that's kind of interesting. That's wild. Like, I've seen a lot of rain in my life as well because I'm from the Netherlands, and it rains a lot there typically. Now, apparently the last year it hasn't been as bad, but usually, yeah, you don't see the sun much. But that's interesting that he says that, coming from, being in the UK as well, that it rains more in Auckland. I didn't know that.
Living in Auckland, honestly, I've never seen so much rain in my life. I'm someone who, moving abroad especially, looks for a hot climate, a nice sunny climate to be able to live outdoors, chill on the beach all the time. That's the kind of climate that I love. And yeah, I definitely haven't got that here in New Zealand. The weather in New Zealand, it's not the one, especially because the last place I lived before here was
not
Perth,
the one.
and the weather in Perth was unbelievable for about 8 months of the year. I think we went 4 months without rain in the summer, which was mad, and it's so hot and always sunny there. So coming here to New Zealand was a big shock weather-wise. So how do the people compare for both countries? Generally, I found people in Australia and New Zealand both very nice. I've never had any issues with Kiwis or Aussies. I think, both sets of people in both.
Yeah, both seem very chill. I'd never been there, but from my impressions from watching videos and stuff, and about the culture, both countries seem like the people are really chill, generally speaking.
Countries are very nice. The biggest difference I would say is Aussies are more open and friendly. I don't think Kiwis are any less nice. I just think they're a little bit more closed off and maybe a little bit more antisocial. Maybe because they're just so closed off from the world, so they're just in their own bubble. Generally, I found Australians a bit more outgoing, but I wouldn't say they're any nicer than people in New Zealand. I'd say like both sets of people are very nice, just Australians a little bit more social. So yeah, there's a couple of things that I can compare Australia and New Zealand on. I can obviously go and compare loads of different things, but they are the main things. You may, by my comparisons, have got a bit of an idea where I like the most, and at this point it's definitely Australia. I know I haven't travelled a lot of New Zealand and I'd love to travel some more of it one day, but from my experience in both countries, I can say that I definitely preferred Australia, mostly due to the weather being amazing most of the time, but also it's really nice to be surrounded by other young travellers, backpackers, stuff like that. It really makes the whole vibe nice and you feel like you're at home. It's a lot easier to meet people. In New Zealand, there's definitely a lot more of an...
Yeah, I knew that there's like, of course, people traveling there. I didn't know that it was that prevalent. Is that the word? Like there were that many young backpackers in Australia. Like I said, of course I knew that there are young backpackers, but when he said like I always kind of see one, that's crazy. But I definitely could tell from this list, or from his reasonings, that he would pick Australia. I don't know what I would pick though. I have, again, never been to either, so I can't really say.
Older population, there's kids and there's adults. Anyone in their 20s seems to have left for Australia already, so it's definitely been harder to meet people and make friends here. It's a lot of an older crowd. and there's not as much going on. So at this point, I definitely prefer Australia. You might prefer New Zealand. You might not care at all about like having backpackers around you and it being busy and having other travelers there. You may not like the hot weather, so New Zealand could be a great option for you. There's some amazing places you can live in New Zealand, particularly on the South Island. But if you're looking for hot weather, surrounded by backpackers, chilling on the beach every night, Australia is definitely your best bet. Now, I've enjoyed my time in New Zealand, but yeah, it's not been anywhere near as good as Australia for me. That's just a personal opinion, and definitely this year want to get back to Australia and start living that beach life again, because yeah, it's definitely our favourite place that we've lived. Like I said, it's not to put you off going to New Zealand, because it could be a great option for you. However, if you're similar to me and like that other kind of lifestyle, then Australia is going to be your best bet. But definitely do your own research, because not everyone cares about the beach and other backpackers as much as me. So yeah, there's a few comparisons. Thank you for watching. If you need any help on anything like this, then leave some comments down below and I'll get back to them.
Yeah, I'll end it there. But yeah, like he said, that's mostly because he cares more about the hot weather and the beach and other young travelers. I don't know if I would necessarily care for it as much, so I could see myself liking New Zealand a whole lot as well. And I don't know how I would, feel about like permanently being in Australia. Like, it seems like a really nice place to go on holiday, but for me personally to live there, I don't know if I could deal with the hotness and the humidity for that long. I think maybe that's the European, the Dutch person in me. That's like, I want like seasons, like 4 seasons. But then I do complain about them as well, because I don't know, in the Netherlands we do have those 4 seasons, but then not that much sunshine. So I feel like it's just really hard to find a place that I weather-wise would find perfect for me to live permanently. I don't think there are many places like that, because I really value the sunshine, but I don't want it to be hot all the time. So I don't know, but I definitely want to check both Australia and New Zealand out for myself whenever I can. But it was interesting to see his perspective, and I wonder how many other people agree with him, coming from Europe as well. And yeah, let me know if you live in New Zealand or Australia, if you have any pointers that you wanted to point out. So I will be reading those.